Let me ask you a question. So I just want to understand whether do you draw a dividing line between interpersonal racism and systemic oppression?
So I have tried to. I think most people, when they hear the word racism, think of interpersonal prejudice based on race. That has changed or is changing, and there is a big push to use the technical, more academic definition, which is systemic material injustice. And I try to use the academic definition. And usually when I say interpersonal racism, depending on who I'm talking to, I'll say like racial prejudice, because that's a more accurate descriptor. But I grew up in an era when we conflated the terms and nobody knew better. So occasionally I'll use interpersonal racism. I do distinguish between them, those phenomena, and I think that they're interrelated, but they do also exist independent of one another in a number of regards. But there is a systemic historical pattern of injustice that I think if you got rid of everybody who was personally racially prejudiced would continue to perpetuate inequality because of the historical injustices that were wrought. It wouldn't be as bad, but it would still continue in some regard. And then there is a separate thing, which is interpersonal racial prejudice, and they sort of like bounce off each other in this very complicated relationship. I don't think they're entirely separate, but it's like a Venn diagram that's, almost a circle, but not quite.
I think that's a really good way of describing it. I was wondering about the last part. I'm glad you said the Venn diagram part, because I was wondering how much you know about the systemic nature of interpersonal relations and the impact that a racial hierarchy has had on that. I feel like a lot of people don't know much about it. I feel like a lot of people really don't know about it. And so, and that's from my, decades of having these conversations. It's just like something that a lot of people don't think about. I think about it because of my work, because I have to teach people things, right? And so, I have to learn how to connect with them. I have to learn how to gain their trust. I have to learn how to communicate with them in a way that's going to lead to that exchange of knowledge, or bringing out knowledge they already have, all kinds of stuff. So from all of that work, go ahead. You're about to say?
I was going to say, like, a really, like, sort of my go-to example to demonstrate the difference but interrelated relationship is redlining. So redlining was a practice that was put in place due to interpersonal racial prejudice, and it materially disadvantaged Black Americans in a way that prevented them from intermixing with white people along very stark lines in various communities. And it also destroyed intergenerational wealth accumulation in the Black community. That had a perpetuating effect of the white people who were not around those Black people who otherwise would have moved into their communities because they had access to those home loans, became more interpersonally racist as a result of it, and then that compounds their future actions. So you have material systemic racism interacting with and continuing to perpetuate interpersonal prejudice based on race, and they just sort of feed into each other. They're different, but they're also the same in a very interlocked kind of way.
Yeah, that's definitely what I was thinking. That's a really good way of explaining it. I guess the aspect that I'm so in, that I first became interested in racism is something that you are describing, but it's on the fringe of what you're describing, which is, there's the part of interpersonal relations where stuff like, how everybody gets their jobs from somebody they know, or like a connection, a network or something. How people generally like people who look like them, who think like them, who like the same things that they like, etc. Those are psychological observations that we've made, right? However, race has done a number on a lot of that stuff. Making sure a whole category of people were dehumanized, not thought of as human beings. We've worked our way from that point. I feel like a lot of people overlook that. But that's where we started, right? Is that someone who looks like me is not a human being. It wasn't all that long ago.
No, it really wasn't.
Yeah, and so it's just, I think that we often really underestimate what that has done on the way everybody thinks, right? We often talk about the way black people think, actually. Like that's a constant, black people's behaviors, right? Like, and obviously, their thoughts, our thoughts come from our behavior come from our thoughts. So, that we're less intelligent, that we're less rational, right? That we are more impulsive, that we're more aggressive, these stereotypes that come on. But we never talk about the flip side of the coin. What has a generations long history of white supremacy done to white people's psyches and thoughts? I feel like I never hear anyone talking on that question. And I feel like that is one of the number one signs that we actually do live in a white supremacist nation, because they don't want anyone talking about this. This nation does not want anyone talking like racism affects white people too. Like, it's true though. Like, a racial hierarchy has been imposed on all of us, white people included. And that has had a deleterious effect on white people as well. And I've talked to some people on my show about that.
Yeah, I think the reason that people, well, there's multiple reasons. Like there's going to be a lot of different reasons that people don't want to talk about that. I think the most charitable reason that a lot of people don't want to talk about that is they recoil at centering the conversation about the negative effects of racism on Black Americans in the lived experience of white people, which I understand not wanting to do that completely. Then there is the other side of this, which is like the sort of like the co-opty, if we name it and talk about it just enough, then we don't have to talk about it anymore, like rainbow capitalism thing of like, woke corporations and shit, where like, I see you, I hear you, I sat my white ass down and listened just long enough that we don't have to talk about this anymore. That kind of shit. But if you actually interrogated just how much like racism does fuck up white people, I think a lot of white people would be really taken aback by that. And
that's exactly what a lot of white people need, is to be taken aback by that.
Yeah, for sure. Like I've never been in like a corporate diversity training. Like I'm probably going to eventually land in corporate America here in the next year. But I've spent most of my life doing like blue collar work. So I've never had to deal with that. Like anytime I've had a problem with somebody, I've just been like, hey, Dave, you're fucking up. Stop. But I have a friend who is who is like a senior like level executive in like a corporate entity, and he deals with diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff. And he's like, he told me like a story once where he's like, listen, this is the most like baby level, because I was complaining about DEI initiatives and like how they're wholly insufficient, and I was going on my whole like socialist rant, and he was like, yeah man, sure, but like, have you ever been in a room with like a Harvard graduate who failed upward and is finding about racism for the first time? And I was like, no, I haven't. And he was like, these motherfuckers need to get spoon fed. Like, he's like, the baby step, even baby steps is an achievement for these, for these cats. Like, so like, I've never been in that environment, but from what I understand, it's pretty rough. So I've started to like, kind of like, not comment on diversity, equity initiatives as viciously as I used to after reading some of the material, because I just didn't think about it. But yeah, and like reflecting on it, it's like, yeah, that it's like this because this is how it has to be to get through to some people who've literally lived in a bubble fantasy world their entire life where they just have never encountered these ideas. So.
Precisely, man. I mean, the only way you can combat ignorance is with education. There's the only way. Thanks for watching. For access to the full-length conversation and all of the 2-hour-long, unedited conversations that I've had on race, click the support link in the description below. Thanks for your support, and see you next time.